Okay, my name is Peter Braathen, for those of you who don't know me. I'm going to talk about complexity, complex systems theory in relationship to strategic management, which also reflects a little bit about my background and what I'm focused on in my life. I'm originally trained in, my first graduate degree was in electrical engineering, doing nonlinear control and neural networks, those kind of things. And I also have a master's in the business of strategic management later on. And the dilemma that I'm going to be presenting today as well is a little bit of showing in those two domains. Because when I talk to my peers in electrical engineering and the sciences, they will think that I'm too vague and too fluffy when I'm talking about complex systems and control and so on. When I talk to my friends in business schools, they think I'm too rational, almost mathematical to what I'm doing. So the balance between these two is one that is quite difficult to find. So I try to find my guiding stars in also what is practically applicable in the real world. And so also try to link it very heavily to the practical side. And this is what I hope to do today, is to do some theoretical presentation, probably more new to the area of strategic management than to the systems group here, but I will try to make it relevant. Just first, for the people that are not have any knowledge of this discipline, it's basically about how firms generate and sustain competitive advantage. When we work with strategic management, it could be for all types of organization, but a lot of times it's easy to look at the firms that have a profit maximization as an objective. Finding solutions and products that are perceived in the market to be more valuable. It's inherently systemic, actually, in the way that you think about it. If you think about strategic management of a system, of a social system, an organization that is trying to reach a goal. And it's also an acknowledgement in that discipline that it's all about the system's environment fit. The competitive advantage comes from fitness of the system in its environment, that is usually the market. The role of management then is almost like a controller. I don't think people will admit that it's a controller, but it's a controller trying to position the company and the system to be fit in its environment. And the management, hence, is a type of a controller for this system. So the overall discourse in strategic management is it actually possible to control a system like that through management? And further, what are the types of control that is applicable or that you can use? It's a part of the economic tradition and the business discipline. This is just an introduction for people that have had no introduction to this discipline before. It's gone from a very static outset to a more dynamic, basically driven by the increased complexity and dynamics in the markets. And I think most people realize it's in its full after the financial crisis in 2009, how dynamic and how extremely complex this world of business has become over the years. But it started out in the 50s, late 50s, with people like Peter Drucker, Alfred Chandler, Anselm Selznick, that are basically the fathers of this discipline, looking at how can we understand the firm and how it's structured and how it operates and how it plans in the future. Also going back to the question from Herbert Simon about the competitive advantage. So in the beginning, it was more of a strategic design, almost objectively thought of as scientific analysis of a system environment fit, trying to design organizations and structures that would follow the strategy. It moved basically from that type of structural thinking into a market-based view, where the main promoter was Michael Porter, that you might have heard about, that was looking at the market as a type of trying to analyze the market and what they call the value chain to understand where is the niche for the company. So trying to find a niche in the value chain for the company where it could fit with its suppliers, with its customers, with its competitors, and trying to understand how strategy again can be designed. It's still based part of the design perspective. As we moved into the 90s, people are looking more and more to what they call the resource-based view. I think it followed on the fact that organizations were more and more occupied with competence. It was not only the assets, the capital, owning the assets and the factory floors, it was more about people, it was more about how people worked, and the competence that resided in people. So it was a competence view and it was a resource view on how do you preserve resources within the company, and how do you set up configuration of resources that are not very easy to imitate or move, and that could be sort of the competitive advantage. And part of that was also a shift to looking at competence and what they call capabilities. Capabilities, I will discuss more in depth today, was an activity-based, what should I say, the pattern of activities that would create some output. Again, looking at what are the employees and the individuals of an organization producing based on their activity and based on their competence. And later on also what they call dynamic capabilities that I will go into in more details. All along since the 70s or 80s, it's been also a side track of evolutionary view on strategic management, led by people like Henry Mintzberg, Brian Arthur, that was part of the Santa Fe Institute for the systems guys, that's been looking at how can we see strategic management and organizational theory and development of this in an evolutionary point of view, linked partly to complex systems. We also had from that view that firms follow more path-dependent tracks that are much more based on coincidence and randomness in the market and co-evolution with other companies than the original strategic view that had more of a design perspective on it. Hence also the focus on learning organizations and so on. So this is a very, very quick introduction to strategic management and the background. I will then focus a little bit on what are capabilities, the way that it's defined in this discipline. It's a set of activities with the capacity to create a particular result in a repeatable and reliable manner. This is how it was defined. And the other part of it was that it's a significant contribution to the organization. And this separates this from what we can call a routine, and I will get back to that. But it's something that produces a valuable output to the organization and hence plays a function inside the organization in the way that it contributes. So the significant value that is produced plays a function in the organization. From a point of view of system, it fills a function, it creates an output, it's a set of activities, and it will link back to what I will talk about later about the actual ontology of that. And it's repeatable and reliable, that could be seen as a stable pattern that is also related to. So this is, capabilities has been discussed since the late 70s or 80s. I think it was originally in an article, I can't remember the name actually, or the year right now, but it's from the 70s, 80s. And in 97, somebody started talking about dynamic capability. This is a terrible slide, and I did it on purpose, because it shows something of the problem with dynamic capabilities. This was introduced in 1997, and this article is the most cited article in the line of strategic management throughout the decade since then. And it's basically saying that a dynamic capability is the ability to change its capabilities, to say it in very plain English. But the original definition was the capacity of an organization to purposefully adapt, integrate, and reconfigure organizational skills, resources, and functional competences toward the changing environments. And it's been a debate, and several different definitions of dynamic capabilities. Some of them are here that are most prominent. Just to give you an idea, dynamic capabilities, thus are the organizational and strategic routines by which firms achieve new resource configurations as markets emerge, collide, split, evolve, and die. Or dynamic capabilities is a learned and stable pattern of collective activity through which we the organization systematically generates and modifies its operating routines in pursuit of improved effectiveness. These are the kind of definitions and the discussion that has been going on within this field of dynamic capability since then. The problem is that when you are trying to describe something that is very dynamic with words from social sciences, it's very easy that this sort of becomes this biting its own tail. And it has been heavily critiqued to be too vague and too inclusive, lacking the underlying theory at the micro level, lacks a coherent theoretical foundation, and it's difficult to see practical implications. And this is sort of the outset for some of the work that I'm trying to do on this, to see, is it possible to apply the language of systems theory in understanding and giving a more precise and more theoretically foundation to what is a dynamic capability and what is the difference between a dynamic capability and an operational capability. Further, if we can link it to systems theory, are there other aspects of systems theory that could give input and understanding of what is a dynamic capability? And thirdly, is it possible then to have practical implications in design and development of organizations in the practical world? So here it goes. Then if we look at capabilities as a complex system, we first need to look at the organization as a structural hierarchy of systems. And I'm basing this completely in an action ontology framework or on an action ontology. Where philosophically you could say that everything in the world is really movement and change and action, going all the way back to Heraclit. I won't do that. But you could look at physics that way, the relationship and interrelationships between particles. You can look at chemistry as reactions. You can look at biology as relationships and reactions. And they all have their different disciplines. Now, strategic management looks at organizations. Hence, this is sort of the span of scale in an organization from an interaction between two individuals, a reaction, if you will, between two individuals, to what we can call a routine, to what we can call a capability based in the definitions from strategic management, to an organization. So an organization is a system, a supersystem of different types of capability, each playing a function, and going back to the definition, being stable patterns that create a reliable result and of significant value. Each capability is a supersystem of routines that are stable patterns of actions. And by stable, we can go and look at it as closed and self-maintained for the criteria for in an action ontology. So I know this is, if you want to relate it to the real world, you can say that down here. Let's take an example of something that is in every organization or corporation in the world. It could be the accounting function, where a reaction would be, or let's say handling of invoices, an accounting function, where the reaction would actually be the receipt of the invoice to the business owner or the line manager, and the first interaction between the accounting and the business owner. That could be one way of looking at it. The routine could be the ability to pay the invoice, which means that you have to have a verification of it, you need to put it into the system, you need to contact the treasury department to pay it, you need to interact with the bank to put it into the system to get the payment, and finally there's a payment produced. I know it's very schematic and simple, but this happens in every organization all over the world every day, many times a day. It's a reliable routine that the company does every day. This routine is absolutely a part of the financial capability of that organization. The financial capability might be its relationship to its ability to pay its bills, its ability to maintain its cash flow, be cash positive, its ability to its owners, to have sort of their trust with its owners, to have the profit of the company, etc. And finally, the financial capability will be part of the organizational output and fitness in the market. So this is how it's possible to see an organization as a hierarchy of pure actions and as a structural hierarchy of building up to the organization. If we look at the capability then as a complex systems, it's again based in action ontology, but it's a super system of a variety of routines. Again, coming back to the financial capability, it's a variety of routines of accounts payable, accounts receivable, et cetera, that goes into the treasury function, et cetera, that goes into the capability of a financial capability. It's interconnected and it's constrained. It has a lot of constraints to what type of appearances can each routine have, what type of output can it produce in appearances, and how is it interrelated? How is it the interconnection between the different routines? It's a stable pattern of activity with a variety of heterogeneous agents. And we come here to the human level. And I will, you might say that the human mind is not considered part of this system. And this sounds very strange, but the human mind is both inside and outside of the system. The human mind goes home, is a part of the family, is a part of a different type of life, or the outside of the organization. In this definition, the organization is purely the actions, routines, and capabilities in organizations. So the human mind, and this is it following the reasoning from Niklas Luhmann, where the human mind is actually an environment to the system itself. And I call this a type of a micro-environment. So I make a distinction between the micro-environment, which is the human mind, and the macro-environment, that would be typically other companies and capabilities in the organization that will interact with it. But it's both part of the environment. The structural fitness of this capability is the stability of its internal structure and the ability to reliably reproduce itself or produce its output. If we look at the functional fitness and coevolution that happens, and this has to do with how does the capability work with other capabilities inside the organization. Is it able to connect with and produce valuable output that is acknowledged and absorbed as challenges to other capabilities in the organization? Is it able to interrelate to also in the market outside of the organization, but especially inside the organization? So is it able to connect and interact with the other capabilities? Further, how can it cope with new challenges and perturbations from the outside of on the boundaries of the organization itself, or from other capabilities inside the organization? Because the environment will change, and this is what we've seen. It will change, and it will change rapidly, more dynamic than before. And here we come back to the micro and the macro environment. The macro environment will change because other firms will do innovations, they will add variety, they will drive complexification of their capabilities, and it's a co-evolution in the market that will drive change. So the challenges that you receive as this capability or the organization will increase in its complexity. On the micro side, also, people will get impulses, inspire new concepts, emotions, values that will drive change into the capability or perturbations to the stability of this capability of action or routines. And this will drive both the structural complexification and the functional complexification of the capability, which again drives the need for change. So you need to change, and here I'm building on your definition, Francis, on a system being a constraint on variety, and a MetaSystem then being the variation on the constraints. So if we look at the difference between the super system, that is sort of the structural hierarchy of this organization of activities or actions, of routines, capabilities in the organization, this is basically putting constraints on variety. It's constraining the number of appearances. It's constraining it by the interconnection between the different capabilities. So both the SuperSystem and the MetaSystem are emergent phenomena, meaning that it's on a new hierarchical level and it's qualitatively different from the sum of the parts. They're created by the parts and they're controlled by the parts are controlled by the whole. So the difference is that a SuperSystem is related to the structural hierarchy and is defined as a constrained variety of the systems. In this example of the capability, it's a constrained variety of routines. So the different routines in the company will be constrained by a capability. This capability plays a function in the overall organization. A MetaSystem, the ability to change this, the dynamic capability, is a dynamic variation of these subsystems. And the subsystems being then the routines and the capability themselves for the organization. So a dynamic capability can then, in that language, in the systems language, be a constrained variation of organizational routines. Or again, a constrained variation of constrained varieties of organizational actions. So that gives us two types of archetypes of control mechanisms in an organization. Yes?
Can you give an example of a SuperSystem or a SuperSystem transition?
I'll give you one at the end. Is that okay? Because I'll come back to some very practical examples. So But this is almost like two archetypes of control mechanisms in an organization. One is the operational capability, or a SuperSystem. It's subsystems made up of operational routines. They can take on different appearances and still be in a dynamic equilibrium. But it's a constraint on the variety of organizational routines. And you might say that this is relating to manage something that is operating and producing a reliable output, coming back to the definition of the capabilities. For the dynamic capabilities, it's a MetaSystem. And this is really a MetaSystem that changes the constraints on the variety of operational routines. And that means, in the systems point of view, letting operational capabilities find new appearances not already known or recognized in the organization, and letting them find new connections with other capabilities in the organization. Okay, another question is, are they emergent? Do they emerge by themselves, or are they actually designed by the management of the organization? And yeah, this is where you know I've been too long in business, putting up 10 steps into a MetaSystem. I won't go through this. I assume that most of you that are here already are familiar with the MetaSystem transition. So it's basically looking at the emergence of a MetaSystem through that type of variation and constraints. Here are some macro changes, I should say, leading to, no, actually I'll just push ahead of this. Okay, I'm going to give an example of here it says, macro MetaSystem transition in organizational governance. What has happened? What is an example of a true MetaSystem transitions for the governance of organization? That's been going on through history in the co-evolution of organizations. We start with action again. Action is the pure, sort of the original, or how should I say, it's in the beginning, people started to control actions. If you go back to hunter-gatherer or you go back to a farming community, it was about organizing actions. You go out and pick the stones, I'll pick the firewood, you go out and hunt the deer, etc. This is about organizing actions. And over time, a new MetaSystem to control actions and to control the constraints of actions was really to develop the explicit skills. The explicit skills was, can also be seen as trade. The trade being that you, by controlling the trades of the explicit skills, you also made the changes to the constraints on the interconnection of the actions. The trade again was, or the explicit skills, faced new complexity, and it was an increased variety of explicit skills that was incorporated in the communities and also in the organization, leading to a new type of transition where companies were now focusing on competence. We see this in the era of 90s and also 2000. So instead of talking about what you can do, you're talking about competency-based management. You wanted to control and the organization based on a focus on competence. With the number of educated people, competency in the organization, the variety increased, and the dynamics in the market require a new type of complexity. It's not enough to have competence. It's how do you bring that competence out? How do you tie people closer together so they produce results with that type of competence? And require a new level of control on values. And you see today that companies say that they're not hiring on competence anymore. We're hiring on attitudes. We're hiring on values. And you see types of management has switched from management of competence to management on values. You lead by values. You lead by principles instead of leading by what people know in the organization. A lot of times this, I think that we will see in the future that you will see more of a leadership of identity. It's not, it's a type of new, again, the complexity in the market driving these types of complexification inside the organization. And we see part of this already happening in the social media sphere, where it's about identity, creating an identity. This will most likely also lead to a change in the organizational structures that will emerge into a more network-like decentralized structure, where identity is the new control mechanism that actually control all the others. I made this sort of mapping into the information space as well. I don't think I will go through all of that, but it's basically how does sensing relate to contextual data, and by performing actions on your context, you can create information. The information complexity require you to organize this type of actions into skills. The skills will create knowledge. Knowledge will be grouped and organized into competencies. The competency will provide some type of an insight that can be transferred into different contexts. The insights will be organized into, again, the values. That is more on what do you focus on and what is your purpose. And perhaps at some point the identity will create some wisdom. Again, this is just the sort of information and governance levels of organization trying to relate or correlate that we see in a lot of these systems. So this is an example of what I would call emergent global governance principles, where you see MetaSystem transitions actually happening across the world, developing from organization and controlling on actions to skills, to competence, values, and identity. If you look at the organization in itself and look at one organization, how can you then look at dynamic capabilities in this perspective to apply it as a type of constraint on variety? And again, the firm is not self-organized in the same way. It has a management, it has a structure, it has a functional hierarchy that is carefully designed. It doesn't always correlate, but it's there. And management will act as a type of a controller, defining the type of dynamic capability. Applying variations to the constraints changes in the variety and the constraints of the internal system. Management can hence be seen as a type of vicarious selector, if you look at the epistemology of Don Campbell. And that means that the management is anticipating and trying out different potential actions without actually making them or making the variations on constraints in the system. So the management will be playing a role where it needs to anticipate and protect the organization from change and to maintain that structural fitness inside the organization. What are the design considerations that you need to think about if you want to design a dynamic capability inside the corporation? It's really the ability to sense the changes at the boundaries. And what are the boundaries of the organization? That's really difficult to describe, etc. Exactly. It's been discussed for a very long time. One way that I like to think about it is, again, coming back to Luhmann, it's sort of the boundaries held by the categories of the organization and how they interpret and reduce complexity from the environment. But you need to be able to sense from the boundaries, from the outside, and you need to be able. Top management is not always able to sense what's going on in the environment, as we know. You need to combine it, though, with some type of organizational memory and make sure that you do not change too hastily on new inputs. Hence, also protecting the organization, the internal part of the organization. Make sure that you are able to anticipate and try out as, again, a vicarious selector without having direct effect on the organization itself. Then it's a level of influence. To what degree does management really able to influence individuals on the level below? If we are to believe the structural and functional hierarchies, you are changing the constraints on the variety on the system in a functional hierarchy. Also, preferably following the structural hierarchy, even though in an organization it might be very different. And so I put up a three-dimensional sort of model that could be a way of classifying this, where I say on one axis here, and this is going back to the normal things that you would typically find and management has influence over. It's the structure of the organization, or structure in general, it's process, it's people, and it's the technology and systems. So in a way you can say that variation can be introduced by people and technology or systems, and integration is a way of applying structure or processes to the organization. Then I think we have to see that there might be at least two different levels of influence of change and challenges to the organization. It's on the micro level, which is basically the human mind, and people coming to work, taking part in these routines and in interactions in the organization. And it's a macro level where you have moves and actions from other capabilities in the organization or other parts of the market of companies that would drive the macro complexification and challenges. If I take it down to two dimensions to look at the macro environment, we may see obviously that the structure and the people area here means changing performance criteria, incentive structures, reorganization could be an example of it. If you look at the systems and technology, it's new communication system, reporting and control structures. If you look at changes to processes, it's systems supporting new workflow and its business processes, relaxing or tightening the constraints on the different parts of the process, interconnecting the different capabilities and routines in the organization. This is very general, so I'm going to go down to more specific ones soon. If you look at the microenvironment, you might say that the structure, and here's the ability to change, the integration and constraints, might be on new categories and memes in the organization, where management can work with the actual categories of the organization and how people think. And you can also give people a sense of belonging to a result and a purpose that is basically part of the microenvironment for an employee. As part of the structure on technology, social media might be seen as one example of the extension of individual reality and categories and representation of an environment. On the process side, it's about making new connections, new dialogues, changing the constraints again, managing that, and applying variation on the constraints. And here, for the process and technology, again, integrating personal experiences and personal life outside the organization with and sensing on what's going on outside with the organizational memory, so that you can balance and make the right decisions. Again, input to the vicarious selector of the management. Okay, so I'll your question, Cadell. It's I'm going to start off with some very simple examples of what I'm thinking about. This is from my travel. I was in Singapore last week, and this is an example of what they call a hawker stall in Singapore. A hawker stall is a number of family-owned kitchens where each one put up, or a hawker center, I mean, each one have a different stall, and they put up a menu and their little restaurant. In the middle, there are some areas where you can sit down and dine, basically. So I think it's an example of a super system that has emerged out of the organization over time, of a series of capabilities that is each of these stalls. It's a variety that depends on the environment. So in a typical Chinese area, you would have only Chinese food. In a typical mixed area, you have Chinese, Indian, etc. So it's a response to the environment where they are. Each of these little stalls provide a specific function in itself. So here you have the drink stall where you only buy drinks. Here you have some different types of foods. And there are a common area that has developed where you basically have chairs and tables all over, and where people are selling napkins, cleaning up after you and stuff like that. But it's a sort of a super system in its very simplest model. I was trying to find some very simple models. Here's a typical American strip mall of a similar kind. There's no real change in itself, but at some point, these two places offer an emerging quality. The emerging quality is that this is a place where people go to dine with their families. This is an emerging quality where people come to have some sort of an experience that you can only have at the hawker center. Is that?
Religious supplies there.
Yeah.
So the kind of stuff you would find here in Belgium.
No, so this, that's why I picked it, because I was looking at it. This was like, this is interesting because this is a strip mall or a shopping plaza. There are many of them in the U.S. or in, I don't know if it's in Canada as well, but it's sort of a way where people come down and you wonder why a religious supply, dry cleaning, and carpet care is in one shopping plaza. But it shows sort of the simplest form of a super system where there's no real maintenance of who is a tenant. So every time there's something that is free here, somebody can come in and rent it, which brings sort of the fitness, but it's not the ability to change the variety of who is there through this type of system. This is a very modern shopping center in Singapore called Ion that I think shows some types of these dynamic capabilities. Again, you have sort of the structure where you have the whole interconnectedness, and it's designed to have structures and communication and have people to be able to move between the different shops. But it's also bringing different kinds of changes in the connections or variations to the constraints, where you would typically regroup themes for the shops. You would redecorate for the season. You would apply services for the people to be able to connect better. You will change to the organization of the community around. So you're applying different variation on the constraints on the different capabilities inside. This is a real, the other two were just examples, but this is a real challenge for a company that I have been studying and also worked with for a good while. It's a political decision to develop a new part of Oslo, and you see it down here. This big part of Oslo center to be upgraded after many years of mismanagement, I should say. So this company is a property development company, and it's a cooperation between government capital and privately owned capital. And the task is really to create the most attractive area in Oslo to both live and do business, which means it's sort of a complex living system, and it's a big challenge to do that. This is what is already created. It's called a barcode in Oslo, which is only office space for big companies. And that was the easy phase. So that's done. And they have new tenants, everybody's happy because it's a traditional property development. Now the new CEO was tasked with the next step in this, and you see it here. It's the yellow line here, so it's not very much of this whole area. The task is to create an attractive place to both live and work, which is a much harder thing to do. You have to look at the boundaries, to look at communication with this whole area. You have the seaways, you have trains coming in, you have subways, buses, of course. You have to see how it relates to other defined areas of the city. This is a major immigration area of Oslo, and immigrates to a big variety of people. You have to look at the boundaries of nature. It's on the waterfront, it's to the city. This is a new opera building, it's coming a new museum. So it's a lot of these considerations that are very difficult where you have boundaries. It's if you look at this again as a super system, you can say that when you build these buildings, when you, taking the examples of the shops and restaurants, and again, if you put shops and restaurants into this, it will create some type of an identity. This already had the name, as I said, barcode, because people thought that it looked like a barcode. So it has its own identity. It has an identity when, an atmosphere, when you design shops and culture and food and beverages, offices, etc. And you need to look at, the design now needs to look at what are the integration, what are the connection between the shops and the services, and what is sort of, how do you create the atmosphere and the identity that people want to live in. Also, what are the different areas that might have different themes, where you constrain some of the variations of variety on what types of shops, services, etc. can be in that area. The question then became, how do you preserve that sort of, assuming that this, you create a super system here that is attractive for people, so it has certain fitness to the city of Oslo. The fitness is where attractive, where people want to live and work. How do you preserve this over time? And then we come also to the dynamic capability of that change. So what is the variation of these constraints that you need to install now in order to remain the fitness? So that means that you cannot only look at how we get the different shops into the area, but we need to install some type of embodiment that actually is able to do the variation of those interconnections. Okay? So that means that if you are, some type of a shop is going out of business, it needs to be a very conscious choice on how to create and attract the right type of capability or business in that sense that will relate well and that will remain the fitness of that particular area. So it's a board sort of established as that type of dynamic capability that looks after the variation of the constraints, again the constraints being the interconnection between the different shops and the services and offices and so on in this area. Further, there's about the board, you need to know how do you remain fitless, how do you remain fit to what people think, because what this company realized was that the top management is mostly men in their 50s. And so how do they know what is attractive to the entire population of Oslo? Well, you need to have sort of sensory input from trends and people that know what's going on in the city, what is attractive, and you have to feed these trends into this board that could look at the variation of the constraints and the variety of the shops. Further, you need to know what's possible from a product or technology point of view. Again, can be seen on the boundaries and have this also as type of innovation put into that dynamic capability. So that's one example that is sort of related to these dummy examples that I picked up. That is a real case study of a company and how to create and design a type of dynamic capability to remain the fitness of this area of the city. Case study number 2 is different. And it's a mix of design and emergence that I think is interesting about it. This is a company called National Oil Well Varco. It's the largest supplier of products and equipment to the oil industry in the world. It's about $23 billion revenue a year, 65,000 employees, 1,200 offices in the world. It was formed 150 years ago, but this story begins really in the mid-90s, following the crisis at that time in oil prices, and nobody wants to move into the industry of oil. So it was cheap to buy companies, and the guys that started this new phase of the company was just saying that rust never sleeps, there will be a need for new equipment in the oil industry, and we're going to be the Walmart of the oil market. So they took the company public and they started to buy companies. So it's based on acquisition of companies, which brings in variety. So if you buy a new company, a new service or technology, usually based on products and technology. Things that, stuff like this. So, and then the main success was really in the integration of the companies. That is basically putting up the constraint on how this new company relates to the other companies in the structure. So we're buying a new company, it brings a variety. How does that interrelate? What are the constraints we're putting on this company to interact with the other companies? And this created a system of companies that is a constraint on the variety. Over the years, they have acquired more than 250 companies. It's an extremely large set of acquisitions. What happened, which is the interesting part of this, I think, is that the variety of companies or products that came into the portfolio started to work together to start to create systems. So if you had some valve company, you had piping, you had pumps, you had something else, that started to create the system. It was not done completely as an emergent thing. It was also encouraged in the integration process that I will talk about shortly. But this happened. Then it was a coincidental, it's happening at the same time, change in the market where the oil companies, based on this type of crisis, didn't have enough suppliers. And they were opening up for a new way to deliver. Instead of the oil companies specifying exactly what they want, they said, just give us the whole thing. The whole thing being this kind of thing. And the whole thing would mean that they delivered a drill ship. This is a drill ship. So everything that is not on the hull, as I say, itself, is what they call a drilling package. So when the oil company said, well, can anybody just provide us the oil rig or the drill ship? NOV stepped up and said, yes, we can do it. Meaning that we're delivering the whole package. The whole package then consisted of these, not the 200, at that time a much smaller number, but it gave sort of an emergent design or capability that was sort of the whole package itself, consisting of all the capabilities of products, the variety of products, the integration and constraints put on the products were now set into a new system throughout the package. So the package itself would set a new set of variety or new set of constraints on the varieties. So it was varying the constraints on the variety to use that language. The interesting part of this was that the ability to deliver this package, where the package in itself became a dynamic capability, led to a reinforced acquisition strategy, where the speed of acquisitions picked up very, very quickly. As for the MetaSystem transitions, you would see that companies are now finding new niches. So when you have the total package, you see that you can add on an extra product or variety to that package easily. So because we have a lot of systems on this total package, you see that we could actually buy an extra valve company, or an extra control system, or an extra service company, or something like that, because it's a niche that fits into our package. And so you would pick up with a very accelerated speed the acquisition of all these companies and now make this total package of a drill ship. So in that sense, the package acted as both some sort of a semi-MetaSystem transitioning out of variation coming in, new types of constraints being enforced, the ability to start to form systems, and the outside challenge from the market, where it was possible to put the systems together in a total package. The speed of acquisitions was increasing as the package also offered new types of niches to new products, where it was possible to go out to acquire and integrate new types of products. Another interesting part is that today, several of these companies would not be profitable in the market itself. So they're only profitable as long as you are able to provide the whole package. So this package is today holding it as a major constraint, but also is the one that is changing the constraints inside the organization. I was saying that the principle of integration, this is becoming very practical from a business point of view, but I'll try to link it in. The principle of integration is really relating to sort of the senior management had 4 principles, which is very simple. When they took over a new company, so they acquired some variety, they would say, we'll have to act with urgency. How do you work on common projects right away? Allow for new appearances of this variety and new connections to be made. So a stable capability inside a company would then have the ability to take on new appearances and connect with different types of companies, other places in the corporations. Have principles that are non-negotiables. One of them was financial reporting. It will always be financial reporting all the way to the top, functional. There will never be financial reporting to the operational unit and the CEO of the local company acquired. This was providing a global system of structure where you change the structure and the interconnection and constraints on the relationship between the different companies. Engage. Win the hearts and the minds of the people, which means reduce the perturbation of the microenvironment and try to almost install the new means of a vision and a reason and a purpose for people working in the organization so that they will again contribute. Understand and respect the business. Don't try to force one culture. That will bring less complexity, less ability to deal with the changes in the market, but rather maintain the variety or increase the variety for external control. And again, if you remember that 3-dimensional map that I was showing earlier, you could, and I will go and map these types of things into where, in these 8 categories, these types of integration principles were made. Okay, that's it. I wasn't sure what. Yes.
I got a question about the example you gave with the companies that wouldn't be profitable outside in the normal market. How important are they to create the cohesion for the total solution?
Yeah, absolutely imperative.
So
If you take them out, the whole thing collapses.
Collapse.
Or not collapse, but it wouldn't be the value.
Okay. So it's you kind of.
So it's only the complete fitness is there.
So you need to kind of deliver a spin-off ecosystem, right?
Hmm?
It's kind of spinning off a whole ecosystem.
Yes.
Where you have weak links that hold everything
Yes.
together.
Yes. So it is it's a transition into a new type of. Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
A second question. Talked about the dynamic capability, but not about the dynamic capability framework. Is it a specific reason why you kicked out the framework part?
Which framework?
You mentioned T's in the paper
Yeah.
of 1997,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, that's about dynamic capability framework,
Mm.
right? Where there are specific relations to how the different capabilities align and allow us to create this competitive advantage. But you kind of didn't touch that at all. Is there a specific reason? Or?
No, the reason is just, and I guess a little pragmatic, and I might be ignorant to something that I should know more about, but it's that's one way, and then you have different contributors to the dynamic field of dynamic capabilities that has been
Yes.
I think, having different views on it. So I understand where you're coming from,
Yeah.
but I haven't really. I think my contribution would be to try to apply a different perspective on what is a dynamic capability and what is
Yeah.
already there.
So I understand it's more about, like you said, using the systems concepts to explain the framework is more about, I think maybe the cohesion which you have in the ecosystem,
Right.
where trying to understand which one you need and which one you don't.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I
it's
did
more of a
see
classification of the types of game. Yeah, I'm trying to not go into that because it's. I'm trying to say, is it possible to give a more general
Okay.
type of distinct definition of what it is, which is sort of the variation of constraints and versus a variety. Yes.
Every organization has a decision-making process associated to that.
Yes.
From system to MetaSystem transition, I guess, I'm not an expert on this, there should be a transition, qualitative transition
Yes.
of how decisions are made.
Yes.
So, but if I got it, I mean, I didn't, from the exposition that you gave us, decision making is somehow decoupled from the structural and dynamic.
Yes. I understand what you're saying. Let me use the examples though and show you where decision making and hopefully I'm answering your question. So I think there's several decision making here. It's sort of the decision to actually base it on acquisition rather than M&As, rather than organic growth of the company. There's a decision to have these 4 principles of integration of every company. There's a decision at this point of time in the market and timing where it's possible to say to the oil company, we're going in with the risk to deliver the whole thing. Those are 3 extremely, but then the dynamics of what happens is actually very self-organized. So when I talk to the senior management of this company, they say, today you can rationalize it, and I'm writing about that as well, sort of how to use this learning in a transition for this company into a new market. But right now, if you rationalize it afterwards, you can say that, oh, it was to build the products and the systems and the concepts. And said, no, this is not what happened. They wanted to just store a whole bunch of different product companies like a Walmart. So what emerged out of that from this set of decisions, but still very much emerging from random things in the market, was sort of an emergence of a super system or sort of a MetaSystem transitional influence factor.
But when you say you engage people, people have, I mean, I would feel engaged if I would be part of the decision, or if I know where my general sent me to fight, in
Yes.
what form,
Yes.
not just, for
Yeah.
the orders.
Yes.
So this engagement, this decision making,
Right.
how it will be integrated optimally to the different levels.
If you're, I think there's, again, it comes back to the structural hierarchy of the organization. So if you are in the company that is taken over or bought by this company, the thing would be that you will not be, it will not be a sounding board whether we're going to go into the oil industry. It will not be up for discussion whether we're going to continue to buy companies or whether we're going to try to deliver that package and so on. That would not be up for discussion. But by connecting engagement and working on the common projects, it would be up for discussion to say, okay, so here's your variety, if you will, that you bring in. And here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to go that direction. Let's sit down and find out what is a common future for your capabilities and our capabilities that can create something new. So in that sense, you're part of a decision making, but the functional or the structural and functional hierarchy, you will be part of it from your capability. So I think.
So what's the value of being in the one company? If you still negotiate projects, you can do that in the market, being sort of separate companies. So what's the value of buying these companies and having them in one bunch?
Why do you have to bundle it together?
Yeah, I mean, it's not why. If you want, you can do that. But what's the value? How do you earn money from just putting them together? So you can do the same
It's
being free
really
as
the
market.
complexity of this package. Because if you, and this is what they try to do, the oil companies try to say, we don't want them to come with one package because it's going to be more expensive. So, so we're going to buy one piece here, one piece there, and then we're going to have somebody put it together. The problem is that complexity of controlling that project is so huge because each one of these might be $700 million worth of equipment. Each one, and you're going to deliver 50 of them. So it's so much that if you don't put it into a different perspective, where you try to build from the bottom up, where you build the products into systems, into packages, that is already there. You're trying to control the complexity that is too
So,
big.
as far as I understand, before building all this company, there were 250 separate companies. If you needed to build this kind of, I don't know how it's called, structure, then you had to hire a project manager or project management company which could build this all together, and you had to pay for this company. And now, so the value of putting them together is that you take this project management thing into your own company.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes, but it's
What's more in all this structure?
but it's almost like because you have repeatability. So you have, instead of trying to put together and look at it every time there's a new project and a problem, you will have repeatability. So your learning curve will dramatically go down because you're asking what is different. Every project is different, but what's different with this project than our last project? And that's almost infinitely less complex than saying, so how do we put this thing together?
No, I'm asking what's the difference between the project management company
Yeah.
and having all the companies in one, whatever, owned by the same people.
And that is the difference because the project management company will start by saying, how do we solve this problem? But you could say that if you wanted there are people in this company that are only project managers, if that's what you're asking.
I'm asking, so usually you sort of, you have certain activities which generate value, and you try to figure out what kind of activities generate value. So you have hardware, and you kind of calculate which product line gives what value.
Yeah.
Then you have services on top of it. One of them is project management. So you just buy all the hardware companies and put the project management on top of it as a kind of another business, whatever. It's
Yeah.
not aligned, but
Is it
value.
economical that just, you know, then when you buy them, all their revenue is your revenue. So and you create those, you know, exchanges of services between them, and it's all, you know, duplicated in your value.
You become more competitive in the market if you can provide the same stuff cheaper, which means more efficient. So I don't really see what's the efficiency.
No, okay, I think I see what you mean. I think it's actually you distribute the project management into the product companies. Okay, so if you say this is the amount, the cost, if you will, of project management. Here you will actually trickle it down into the product companies, so that providing this product, providing the system, is distributed into the system, so that the top project management is actually quite small in this, and that's very different.
And I also see another good reason why integrating them all can have an advantage, because if there would be several smaller companies, they would all go their own direction.
Yes.
While what you're actually creating here by integrating everything is an ecosystem. Like you said, some of them wouldn't exist without the whole structure. And you kind of make them become more dependent on each other. While if they are separate companies, they would make sure that they become more independent from each other.
Exactly.
You can actually
And
get very different.
exactly, and it's really the two different, the distinction between the operational and dynamic capability. So by doing it, you're creating an operational capability where you put constraints on the variation or on the variety, really.
Yeah.
So you're constraining what they can do.
Yeah.
And the dynamic capability is actually the ability to then change that constraint, and which is done through the package itself. So the package acts as type of a dynamic capability, depending on the market needs. So one time you want to make this, another time you want to make a jack-up rig, and then, you know, it's different types of requirements for the market. Yes? Oh, sorry, I didn't say.
My question is, in your conversations with, say, Oslo, the senior management teams there, what do you notice are their main problems with understanding the different mindsets that are required for this complex environment for emergence? What are the problems they have?
Now you're back
That's the
to
That's the
this
first
part
one.
of it, right?
Yeah, that's the first one. And the second one is, what is it that suddenly they go, oh, I get it. What happens inside them that goes,
Yes.
that's not going to work anymore, I have to do this.
First of all, it was interesting because my role in it is to lead the process side of it, or strategy in that management team. So I'm not interacting and actually having an opinion, but just to clarify my role. So by entering that team, they said, this is our vision, and that stands. That's fine. So I asked, so what is attractive? And then they said, well, you know, it's attractive. Yeah, what do you mean by attractive? What is attractive? Well, it's sort of to be urban, sort of, you know, live in the city kind of thing. So what does that mean to be urban? Well, you know, you buy coffee latte at Starbucks. Okay, so that's what we're creating? Or what are we really doing here? So how do we know what's creative, attractive? And by the way, you are, you know, middle age is 45 to 50 years old. So you're talking about the young people. How do you know what's attractive to the young people? So that was the first question that was actually sort of postulate of impotence. You know, you are not able to say anything about this. And then they started to say, well, you know, we have to have shops that are profitable. And then an example came up where there was 2 pharmacies on the same block. So why is that? You know, how can that be either attractive or creating that complexity of a feeling of an identity that people are attracted as humans to, that they want to live in. And so we started to say, well, yeah, we need to have a mix. And then we started to look at how people are going to get there in terms of connection to the city and what does that mean. And so that was sort of the train of thought where eventually it led to, well, we actually need to have somebody that makes sure that if we get 2 pharmacies or 1 pharmacy gets out of business, then what? And also in the transition periods, how are we going to get people that actually we want to attract to this? Maybe we need to have some spaces that are not for profit, that are pop-up stores or galleries for young artists, or something that is not, again, profitable in itself, but that increase the complete system.
So the clarity of your persistent questioning and their willingness to engage with the process, but when you leave, a year down the line, do they go back to, because they're still up running the process, so I don't know if you're at that point yet, but is that awareness still maintained within their decision-making process?
I think so, and the reason is let's talk about the decision-making process first. So what they agreed to was that this is a very different question, that we need to open up and think of this more as a network than as an organization. So we're actually controlling a network of partners. So we need information from the outside on innovation and trends and so on, etc. So if we're going to do that, we have to think of it different. How do we operate and maintain that network of partners? That's one part of it. Second, the decision-making process, they agreed to say, these are our sort of our outcomes that we would like to see, what we're talking about now, so they made some decisions on that. And then they said, we're willing to meet every 90 days to measure progress, to hold ourselves accountable to what we agreed upon, etc., etc. So it's sort of a, what do you call it, metronome, or that goes every 90 days for trying to create that sort of development questions and holding yourself accountable. So now, for example, they have established this type of a board. They have established arenas where people come in for input from the boundaries, etc., boundaries of this area. Yes?
I have a general question. You use your main concept seem to be constraint, variety, and variation, concept that come from one of my older papers.
Yes.
But you don't define them clearly in this context. You give a few examples, but what exactly is the variety in this case? What exactly is the variation? And what exactly are constraints? Because a constraint can be anything. It can just be do whatever you want except this. Or it could be make sure that there is a coordination in these and these ways that you interact in the most synergetic way possible. Another form of a constraint. One is maybe easier to implement but less effective, and so on. So, what kind of constraint specifically are you're thinking about? It's not just any constraint that will do the trick.
No, I think you would have to see it back to this. So I'm thinking that it's a variety of routines. And then the question is what is a routine? A routine is a set, and then I think we can go back to the sort of the closed and self-maintained set of actions or reactions or interactions between people. And again, where the people, human mind is an environment, so it's partly part of that system, but it's loosely coupled to that system. So for me, the variety is a variety of routines. And the routine, as a stable set of activities, is giving some type of an output. And the output is seen to be valuable to another routine in the organization, building the capability. So that's a variety part of it. The variation would be how those two routines actually interact. So it's the integration between two routines. No, sorry, that's not the variation, but that's sort of the constraint between them. And the constraint would be one routine creating an output that another routine needs and trying to interact as a routine.
So it's actually kind of the network of how the different routines are linked and
Yes.
coordinated together.
Yes. And that would be then what are the things that you can vary? This comes back to this part of it again. So what can you do what can you vary on the variation of the constraints. You can do something about the process, which is sort of the flow and how do we interact as management. You can do something about the structure. You can do something about introducing a new variety of people. You can do something about introducing new technology. But given that you have the variety, you can work with these two and variations on the micro level, on the human mind, and on the macro level, on the structures.
The constraint part is important because in my first paper where I proposed this idea, the paper is 20 years old,
Yes.
I didn't yet have a very clear idea of what kind of a constraint. Well, now with the latest work on chemical organization,
Yes.
you get some kind of a model of a system as a coordinated flow of activities where the coordination is such that some kind of an autopoietic unit is maintained. There is some kind of a self-sustaining system in there. And that gives you already a much more concrete view of what a constraint is. It is a constraint in the sense that not any process can do anything, but it's a very flexible thing that should be able to adapt to lots of different external perturbations.
Yes. I agree with you, and this doesn't contain that rigidity at all, or concept at all.
But that's why I'm interested in your concrete experience with management to see how do you see these constraints originate in a way that they function well, because there are lots of constraints that are obviously counterproductive.
Yes, but I think that I think maybe in the example of that oil-related company is for me the best examples of constraints, because it's very tangible. It's a capability here, a variety that is brought in as an acquisition. So you buy a company, it has a capability to produce a product with a technology. This product can fit other types of technology into a system. So by saying that now we are only part of the NOV package, you are constraining that output of that product pretty dramatically. So that's a constraint in itself.
In the sense that the output they produce should fit in with the inputs needed by other parts of the company.
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and then I'm just trying to map sort of what is the activity that goes on and they produce an output, which is a physical thing. So I'm just making it very tangible. And that actually fit together with another physical thing.
Yeah.
And that's a very, it's a constraint.
Yeah.
But so it's a constraint that is placed on this company or a capability because they are part of this. Because it could be go out there and do land rigs, just to say something else that stands on land, or processing of chemicals in some other parts of the world.
To give a silly example, if you build a ship like that, you should use common standards and common types of screws and bolts so that everything can be clicked together.
For example, yes.
That's
So one pipe and
constraint,
one pump will actually fit together.
yeah,
Right?
for example. Yeah.
So, and that goes on. But if I was a pump company, and if I wasn't part of NOV, I would probably go out there and try to sell to a chemical plant of Siemens and try to
different
go out.
requirements, and therefore I would
Then
use
we
different
go
standards.
with a variety that take me into innovation that was completely different, take me into a variety that was different. So it's actually a very constrained variety in that I'm part of that. And then this package will change because it's a new generation, it's new technology, new requirements. So it used to be drilling at 100 meters, now they drill at 2,000 meter water depth, and they're drilling 1,000 meters down into the ground. So this will have to change. And the change of this requirement will create variation on those constraints.
Now it will be constrained variation because they can't just vary each on their own, they have to vary while
Exactly.
staying coordinated.
Exactly. So here's a MetaSystem.
Yeah.
And the interesting part, I think a lot of people will say, yeah, that's in any design of a company. But the interesting part is that this company is set up just to buy company. And this emerged out of the increased variety, increased pressure for complexity of delivering this from the market. And suddenly you see that this is emerging and it's accelerating the number of acquisitions that you can make, which I think gives a pretty good inside the company world.
Which is a
And that is-
manifestation of Turchin's rule of the branching out of the
Exactly.
ultimate level.
Exactly.
once you have the control in place that you have this constant variation, it becomes much easier to acquire more variety and to put it into the system.
It's an accelerating, exactly, this is, yes.
So in this example, there's the acquisition of variety, which is a meta decision by the group there.
Yes.
But what if you talk about the future, talking about selection based upon values, so a lot more collaboration happening, cooperation based on values. In the future, talking about identity. So you're saying that groups, organization structure will start selecting and working, connecting up to other entities that they strongly identify with. Can you clarify more what you mean by identity?
Yes, I can, but I'm just trying to see if I can be precise in my answer to you. So you're saying that...
So I'm saying in this example, it seems that we're going to keep buying and buying based upon capability, capacity, what they can provide for the superstructure. If you then move to values, we will look for who shares our values and what we then cooperate to build superstructure. In the future, saying identity, so if I am company X, I'm looking for...
Okay, yes, I understand what you're saying. I think that when I refer to identity, I think I was talking about sort of that level where of a general sort of a general of all organizations in the world over time, where you have seen sort of a MetaSystem transition of different control systems, if you will, controlling at some point action and maybe sensing. So that's sort of the general way where companies have moved from controlling actions to skills or traits to competence to values to identity at some point probably. Whereas, I'm sorry, yes.
So is that another way of saying the organization becomes aware of itself? So the feedback from all different entities. If you advance from
I think it's a self-actualization of the employee, not the company.
What the employee, which then...
So it's, you used to control people's actions, and you said you're a baker, so you can do all these actions. Then you said we have a lot of different people coming in with all sorts of things. We need to move it into different contexts, so we need to build structures of steel and aluminum and so on, so we need engineers, competence. Then we said it's not enough to be an engineer, because we want people to contribute, to create stuff in teams. More complex, you need to be in a team working with people on design and so on. So we actually want people that are willing to work with designers and architects and so on. So it's a value-based management. And at some point, I think that what we're seeing now, and this is why I link it to information, is that we're getting so much information complexity that even that isn't enough. It's about how do you focus, who are you, what are the things that you bring to the table. But that's also calling for a decentralization of every organization into networks and nodes that are more than...
Are you speaking about the identity of the employees or the identity of the firm?
Employees, actually.
Oh.
But it's the same.
Well, that's the other question. Is the sum of the identity? Yeah.
Well, exactly. It isn't the sum of the identities, because the identity, I agree.
Yeah.
I work, I'm a business,
Yeah.
I'm now working at the level of identity.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's not something that I can impose, and say, you,
Exactly.
have this thing.
Yes.
We, as a collective,
Yeah.
seem to have developed this emergent identity.
Yes.
This identity in itself is an attractor.
Exactly.
That generates both energy inside and outside the system, which in itself takes it into the next phase.
Yeah. And I think we're right there in the middle, because if I interpret what you're saying now, to my experience is that that's where we are. So we say that we have an identity, that we want to attract people with the right set of values that can bring their competence
And
make it
all of
happen.
the other things, you don't lose those, you need all of those, of
No,
course,
because
you're
it's
actually being pulled by identity.
exactly. So this is still relevant. It's just that it's sort of that functional and structural hierarchy.
But you said you introduced this as a functional control system.
Yes.
And identity is the ultimate complex control
It
system.
is. What I'm seeing, though, that I think is very interesting these days is that because of this complexity, it's also about because people are carrying, you're plugged into the net all the time. So you see more and more that people are busy whatever they do, and they might have the best values in the world and everything. But it's really your ability to say, this isn't the outcome that I'm getting, this is the purpose why I'm getting it, and the ability to create your own sort of makeup of identity in that organization that will probably become the new currency. who are you? To what extent are you able to create that outcome and purpose for yourself that shows that you can be somebody in this organization? Which is, but then I think you're doing something to the whole organizational makeup.
And you require that whole idea requires a level of what I would call systemic maturity, both of the organisation and of the individual.
Exactly.
So this is
Which it might move, yeah, I agree. So I think that's, but back to your question on the more example of this, was that they actually said, and I'm not, this is not an argument in the conversation we're having, because this was different. They just said, we want to respect each company's different sort of set of values, cultures, and behaviors. And there's been there was a time where everybody had the same company culture wherever you were in the world. And there's also a trend saying that that's completely impossible. And I happen to agree with them. I mean, I work in different parts of the world, and to try to implement and American cultures in Asia or South America or in Africa, that's probably not increasing the complexity and the ability to compete with the company.
It's ambidextrous organizations.
Yeah. Or any other culture. I'm not talking about Americans in particular. I've seen people trying to do Norwegian culture. It's a complete disaster. And also involving people in Asia. Norwegian would typically go in and say, so, what do you think we should do for the next year? Nobody says anything. And the Norwegian would interpret it as, oh, they're so shy, they don't like to be loose-faced, blah, blah, blah. But they're sitting there thinking, who the hell is this guy that doesn't know his job? I don't respect him. Really? So he's asking us what to do. So these are the types of examples you cannot, I think, have fitness if you try to implement culture into an existing culture. You need to be to build that variety, and I think that's part of the successes of this company is to actually maintain the variety in that culture.
Did you actually see some good publications about that? Because I have been reading the papers on ambidextrous organizations, but
Oh, what?
ambidextrous organizations,
Okay.
which is basically about having different cultures in one bigger company. But they
Yes.
stay pretty vague in the contribution it gives. So, I mean, it seems evident, but I don't find really good.
But I come back to Francis' question. It's sort of the variety, because the culture is again the microenvironment of the brain, and what you take with you into this routine of a sustainable pattern, just increase the variety of that routine. And if you let it, by not placing constraints on it, saying you have to act like this,
But in a way,
you will actually.
Yeah,
because
you go back to the example of the pump and the pipe. If the company that makes the pumps has one culture and the company that makes the pipes has another culture, you don't mind as long as the pipe fits into the pump.
Yeah, but it adds value, because maybe you have somebody that makes a subsea pump, which is a completely different standards than something you use on land, which brings value to the difference.
considering your goal to kind of use complex theory to improve the understanding of the dynamic capabilities, I actually think there are many other concepts in the strategy management that could use that, and one of them I think is the ambidextrous organizations, which is exactly about this culture.
Yes.
And I mean, we understand this variety and how it leads to self-organization, how the complexification works. But I really advise you to go and have a look at those papers of the ambidextrous organizations. You will see that they are unable to express what it is.
Okay.
And I think it's exactly the same problem with the dynamic capabilities.
Mhm.
Considering it's if I understood that that's your focus,
Yes.
it may actually be interesting for you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's interesting to see how strategy that is so systemic in everything they do and want to do has only to a very limited degree, as I see it, managed to link it to complex systems.
Yeah, it's incredible.
But I find it very difficult myself, and that's why I'm struggling so much, because of the balance of what you need to do. Because now I have to play down sort of the systems point of view to be accepted in the strategic management point of view.
Yeah, I've tried to. I mean, I've done some presentations in ISPIM. You know that? It's for professional management.
Okay.
It's a conference
Yeah.
presenting self-organizing innovation as a topic. It's like cows looking at a train, basically. So it was a very strange thing. So I understand what you mean.
But about this distinction of operational capabilities and dynamic capabilities, would it be okay to rephrase it like that our operational capabilities are capabilities built from like capabilities of autopoietic system built from those interactions that prove to be most successful in their themselves, and dynamic capabilities is actually perspective on this system from another system and using that autopoietic system as an input-output device, and using those outputs to create another autopoietic system or something.
I would say, because I would say that let's say all the levels, I think, on routine, capability, organization is somewhat autopoietic in its nature, and maybe if you start at the top, it's actually quite. That is also wrong, because I was going to say it's more strong at the top, but probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the lower you go, the more stronger the ones are. But they're all trying to self-maintain, I would say, one way or the other. So yes, autopoietic, but I would say that the dynamic capability is actually changing the variation of how they are connected, how these routines in the organization are
Okay, but
connected.
through inputs, right? They don't dismantle the systems like culture and things like that. They provide different types of input.
I think it would vary, because I think that sometimes and this is going back to that framework I was trying to show here, it depends on what you need to do. I think, I mean, and now I'm in the practical world again. I've been part of projects where we completely dismantled the whole organization, put it together again, because we needed a shift out of it and deliver it, which is basically taking the whole thing apart and putting it together. Or you make just smaller changes to the processes. Now people work, now they sit together and work together, and interpersonal change. So I think.
But you are doing it from a perspective of different boundary. Right? You see different things, and then, right? And you want a different outcome out of that system.
Yes. So in a way. You want a different outcome on the level above, I would think. So if you see that a capability consisting of routines is not, you need to change, then you would make variations to the constraints of the different routines, the integration, the connectedness. Mm-hmm. And you will introduce variety to change the output of the capability. Also on the organizational level, you will look at the capability and you would see at the constraints connecting the capabilities and a variety of capabilities and make changes to that as well. And so it could be a design, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the example from the development of that area in Oslo. Or it could be partly by decisions, but also emerging. That is an example from that oil company, or oil service company.
I think in the autopoietic framework, there is no real space for MetaSystem transitions. I mean, Matura and Valera have at the moment spoken about different levels from just the metabolism and the cognition of another language, but there is not really a mechanism to go from the one to the other, because an autopoietic system by definition is conservative, it wants to maintain whatever organization is there, while a real organism cannot just maintain, it also needs to grow, it needs to acquire additional capabilities even before they are needed, because sooner or later this capability will be needed, some new challenge will appear, and then if it has extra capabilities, it will be able to come. The ones that were conservative and just kept whatever worked up till then will not be ready. Mm-hmm. So it's in a bit, you need to build capabilities that at the moment you don't need yet for your autopoiesis. So it's kind of a higher level. The growth level, the self-actualization level, the development level, that's not part of the autopoietic paradigm.
Okay, but this operational capacity is sent like that, you know, conservation.
Yeah, operational capabilities, just, I would say, what the company does, if it's alive, it has some sort of an, you know, alive meaning that is profitable and running. It has, I think, demonstrated some sort of autopoietic behavior. And the operational capability is maintaining that fitness. But how do you increase, if you see that your fitness is decreasing, how do you maintain it or achieve it? Then you have to start to see how do you change? And the question is related to the dynamic capability. What is that? And then I'm, again, as Francis is saying, is building a lot of on his work from the mid-90s, I think, Francis, right? On the MSDs and...
I think. 95,
Yeah,
I think.
and your work and also touching on what is, you know, if we look at it as variety and constraints, then we could make a difference, distinction that could perhaps let us understand some of these things in practice in a different way, coming back to the pump and the value. Because right now, I think in strategic management literature, it's very difficult to go in and say this is where it is. Hi, Craig.
Hi. I work in the energy business, so I just think there's a lot of interesting possibilities out of this paradigm. I mean, only this week we have seen just massive changes in the German energy companies sector. So just this, do you see any link to external pressure? You see these big companies that all of a sudden lose their business model? And those who are able to exploit the variety they have within the company seems to be most likely to very suddenly make a new business model and survive. So there's some sort of element of a need for developing a resilient structure, maybe linked to the processes that you have outlined here, in order to tackle that.
Yes. I'll give an example because it's very related to this company right here. Because you all seen that oil prices has dropped to $60 per barrel, but before that, it's been a trend. This massive trend over the last 15 years plus has been for the oil, the notion of peak oil. The peak oil is going to run out. So people have been looking for oil desperately because if you found oil, you're going to succeed. So exploration of and search for oil has been peaking, meaning that the drilling has been peaking. They found oil, they're drilling for oil, they're drilling like crazy all over the world. That's one of the reasons why this has been so successful. So what happens but oil in the ground is still oil in the ground. So how do you convert oil in the ground to money? Is to bring it up from the ground. So before the slash in oil prices, you would see a shift where drilling was falling off like a cliff. People aren't drilling to the same degree, but they want to produce oil. So, and this is part of also what I'm working on, and where I will actually take this work a little further, is to look at this company and how do you make the transition of these capabilities and variety into a production area. Okay. Meaning that a lot of these components and technology are still to be used. You still need a pump and a valve and everything, but it needs to be put together in an entirely new way to be able to produce oil. And so here you have sort of the transition of the whole capability. And if you continue this company's acquisition strategy of technology, if you don't have this, you will acquire a new company, get some more revenue, get some profit, incrementally build momentum. But how do you take this into a transformation of those capabilities into something new that brings value to maintain this company and its fitness? And this is exactly what you're saying. How do you do that? And that's. I don't know if that was the answer, but it's a parallel to what you're saying.